This is the Henry's Child Podcast. Am I crazy? Or am I just raving?
Hey guys, Thom here. Today's episode of the Am I Crazy or Am I Just Raving podcast is a pretty special one. I sit down to talk with Rex Morningstar. Now, Rex and I had a band before Henry's Child called Hack. And eventually, Rex joined Henry's Child. And within less than a year's time, we cut an entire record and ended up going on a Southwest tour. So, Rex, aside from just the music, has had a significant impact on my life because I met my daughter's mother through Rex's wife, Cetus. We talk a little bit about that in this episode. And then Rex also married me and my wife. So throughout the years, I've not only kept in contact with Rex, but have continued to have a relationship outside of music. Now, this particular episode also is a little different in that it's my first episode where I didn't sit down face-to-face with a guest and speak with them. Now, rather, we ended up doing things online. So, sure, it's not the best quality, but the meaning of the communication comes across pretty well. So please enjoy my conversation with Rex Morningstar. So Rex, in doing this podcast, I did a lot of thinking about how sort of deep and profound both you and Cetus have been in my life, and how grateful I am to have met you in the first place. Because what I didn't realize, of course, we live in the world of creating. You don't know that you don't know. There's just this realm that exists where we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And one of those, I didn't know how deep of an impact that you would have in my life. And so I guess to all of our listeners out there, it's probably a good place to start would be how we met. So do you remember how we met, Rex?
Yes, I do. We met, in college, at community college, and if I'm not mistaken, it was in photography class, and you've informed me, because I don't remember all the details, but I've talked to you about this since then. You've informed me that it was at a night photography class, and that I walked in and we saw each other, and it was true love. That
is probably the best way to put it. Yes, for sure. Yeah, it was a nighttime. Okay. It was a nighttime class. Because it was a nighttime class, it was very elongated. So it was like 2 or 3 days a week, but it was 3 hours. And one of the things...
It was elongated.
It was elongated. It was kind of a long thing. And so one of the things that we had to do in this class was we had to not only develop our own pictures, but take our own pictures based on a theme. And I remember we had to share them with the class. And the first time that I ever saw what you had shared was basically this close-up picture of Ceris's back that was... There was baby oil on it, and there was like water sprinkled on it. So the picture was of the water spotlets, and I thought to myself, this guy is artistic, not autistic. This guy's artistic, like he gets it, like he's a real champion of true art. I was very impressed. Right.
A champion of the arts. You know what's funny about that is that actually, Cerise is like, we're having an evening at home alone. And I'm like, hey, let's do some really artsy nude photos, okay? And she's like, yeah, but people they always end up not being private. Everyone in the world ends up seeing those things like videos, And I'm like, no, it'll be fine.
So we met in photography class, and I saw this picture of what was at the time was your girlfriend back. And I'm like, this guy, he gets it. He is
my life partner. She was my life partner.
Indeed. And she still is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So we bonded over music, and one of the first things I remember that I had a cassette tape, and my cassette tape was of my band at the time called Rain's Edge. And Rain's Edge was a Christian sort of progressive metal band. We were obviously thought we were way cooler than we really truly were. And
well, you were in the line of Stryper, weren't you? You were in the musical line of Stryper. I
would say yes. We were part of that lineage of.
Okay, that's fine. We all got to come from somewhere.
Having a Christian message, but yet playing in secular bars and clubs. And I had brought a cassette to class for you, specifically for you, Rex. And I remember I charged you for the tape. And I felt super bad because I was like, I'm going to charge this guy for a tape. How do you feel about that?
It's not only did you charge me, which is admirable in its own weird way, but like you handed me the tape and I said, hey, thanks. And then when I stuck it in my bag, you go, oh, I got to ask for $5. So it was like one of those weird tricks that they do in San Francisco. You know, the street vendors, they'll give your kid a balloon and you're like, thank you. But then like the guy's like, hey, give me $1. And I'm like, what? So I'm impressed, Thom. That has served you well.
So as a street vendor, I love it. There was 6 songs on there, and so it was less than $1 a song.
I think you remember. I remember you saying something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Well, anyway, so I gave you this tape, and you listened to it, and in exchange, you gave me a tape of some of the stuff that you'd been doing. Somehow or another, we managed over the next kind of couple months to start a project, and the project we started was called Hack. And I'm sure that you remember Hack. Now, Hack, I kind of joined, and it was me and our dear friend Richard Miller, right? And you and Revo Godwin was in it for a while, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then we cut, I think, like 4 or 5 songs. I have 6 in a Pro Tool session that Jarrett gave me.
Fantastic.
And then we got this cat named Steve Areola. Remember him?
Steve was fantastic.
Yeah, Steve
was an incredible guitar player. Love that guy.
He was a guitar player, and in fact, you know what I really liked about Hack was the fact that it was, well, first off, I'd never been exposed to a vocalist quite like you. I loved your songwriting. I loved the way that you played guitar and sang at the same time, and they were just really, really catchy. Like one that sticks out for me that I wish I had a copy of is called Janus. Or Janice, and you kind of did that, I think, as Hack,
Janus Freak.
But the Janus Freak, yeah. And there were even references to that in Learning Too Much, which we'll get to in a second. So I thought I'd like to play a song from that band, Hack, and the song I'd like to play today is "Bag of Bones." Remember that one, Rex?
I do. That's a fantastic song.
It is good. It's very, very catchy. Like you were saying before, this is not some groundbreaking recording. We actually did this in a place called the Juke Room with Richard Miller and our friend, rest in peace, Cory Empens. He helped us out with some gear, and we were able to get this recorded. So this is Bag of Bones from Hack.
Softly, sobriety, bag of bones, let it ravage, flesh of choice, youth and substance, bones its noise, bag of bones. Bones confused, whisper gently, floating near. Did I tell her she was not whole? With every preaching, bones to hold. Wash up my trouble. Wash up my trouble. Wash up my trouble.
Yes, Bag of Bones. Bag of Bones. That was some really good stuff. So in Hack, we ended up playing out several places, mostly in Eugene. I remember doing lots and lots of shows at John Henry's. That dank and dark John Henry's. And then we were kind of doing Rain's Edge and Hack at the same time, at least I was. Maybe you had tried out as vocalist for Rain's Edge and it just sort of didn't work out.
I did.
With Barry. But
it didn't work out. If I remember correctly, you guys were practicing in a church. And I was so anti-Christ at the time, I felt I got the heebie-jeebies about going in, and I think I gave you some issues about going into the church, because I'm like, I don't want to go in there and practice. It was weird. Yeah, we went in and ran through some songs, and Barry was there, and I was very impressed with all of you, and a very interesting musical endeavor on your part, so that was fascinating.
Good, yeah, and so instead of you joining us, I joined you. So it ended up being the best of both worlds for me for a while. I could swing both ways. I could do Rain's Edge on the Thursday and Hack on the weekend, and it was a beautiful thing. And then I got The Godfather came to me, and they gave me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And the offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah, but you had quit Rain's Edge, if I remember correctly, when you were playing with Hack at some point, right?
You know, I
think you did.
As I recall, it was really the drummer, Micah Bruce, who had held us together for a long time.
Yes.
And so it was really me hanging on, trying to get Rich Miller involved as well. And so he played a couple of shows. And even Jake Morton, who was on this podcast a couple weeks ago, played trumpet and guitar in it for a while. So it was kind of this bastardization of going from a 3-piece to like a 7-piece, where I had kind of like all my friends in there doing it.
Yeah.
So there's a good chance that I actually had quit Rain's Edge first, and then I quit Hack, because the offer that I couldn't refuse was joining Henry's Child. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the day I told you, man. That was one of the hardest things I ever did. I tried really hard to convince those guys to let me do it, and they're all like, it's not a convincing thing of letting you do it. It's like, we practice every night. And I kind of thought they were joking for a few minutes. But it ends up, they really did practice every single night for like 4 hours. Yeah. And granted, this was before families, and this was before girlfriends and stuff. So we had that sort of time to devote to our musical endeavors. Yeah, it was very sad. So I go off and I kind of do Henry's Child, and Hack sort of dissolves. And in Hack's sort of de-evolution, you create a band called Cetus. Tell me about Cetus.
Oh, so Cetus was great. I do remember going back to, the Hack, that I remember at some point you leaving Rain's Edge and me being really thrilled, like, I pulled off, stealing Tommy Tessendorf, this amazing talent, and Rich Miller from this band. I feel like I did it. But then, of course, soon afterward, and I would always drill into your guys' minds because I was like kind of a micromanager, control freak. If you ever leave this band, there's going to be trouble. I was like a psychological bully. And I could see the fear, like, in your eye, at one point, because I knew you were talking to those guys. And then, like, the night came, and you're like, hey, you sat me down, and you told me I got, Henry's Child. I'm like, well, can you do this other thing on the side? He's like, no. You're like, no. And I remember, like, getting really emotional and like, stomping out and yelling. And, I mean, it was a real classic early 90s grunge band scene. It was just awesome.
Right, totally.
But then, so we started Cetus right after that, and I hooked up with some musicians, Dave Heiner, Scott Lepley, and Jason Kemp from the Coast, the Oregon Coast. They came out and had a band. They didn't have a singer. And so I believe I responded to an ad, went out there and met those guys, and they were very accomplished musicians from where they came from, and had a really unique sound, kind of rooted in 90s grunge, but like more weird. It just had a lot of weird influences, and I just loved it. So I laid some lyrics down on a couple songs. They loved it, and we started playing shows. I believe I had a show at John Henry's booked for Hack, and it was like in 2 weeks, but Hack dissolved. And so I said, hey, are you guys interested in playing this John Henry show in 2 weeks? And they said, yeah, sure. So we came up with about 6 songs, if I remember correctly, and we pulled off a show at John Henry's on the hallowed ground of John Henry's. But it was fun and a learning experience. And I ended up playing with those guys, I think, for a couple of years before it broke, and then had an adventure with you after that.
Right. And so for all those true fans, what Rex is referring to is the John Henry's that was on West 11th. So the original old school originally was Club 316 or something like that before it became John Henry's into the staple that it was. And I remember distinctly going with Rich Miller to that show, the show that was supposed to be for Hack, where Cetus played. And it was the first time that I ever heard Rex sing hard rock. And it blew my flippin' mind. I mean, he was up there.
Oh, yeah.
He had kind of this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Bono, right? And he had this giant light that you must have got from like KZI or something that you worked for this year. Remember that giant light?
Right?
Where you literally were like melting.
It was a football stadium light. They would use these things, and I got a football stadium light. But the problem was it was incandescent. It wasn't LED yet. And so whenever we'd turn that thing on, half the time we'd blow a breaker in John Henry's. And so I had to make sure everything else was off and we called it the sun lamp. Because literally when you turned it on, if you stood too close to it, you would get a burn on your legs, right? Because we always had it behind the drummer. And so we called it the sun lamp, and I always had to warn people. I said, stay away from that thing. It's hot, So it's kind of a funny story.
It was crazy. But I was blown away, and so we followed Cetus around. Whenever you had shows, I'd come and support you guys, and you even joined the Sonic X-Plosion too. Like you were kind of in that competition.
Yeah, that's right.
Which there weren't really many bands that were doing that, and so that was pretty awesome. And then we flash forward about 5 years to 1998. Andrew Smith leaves Henry's Child, and we are left devoid of a singer. And so we had a conversation with Rich, and we had a conversation with Doug and Jarrett. And, we decided to keep the name Henry's Child, keep going. And one of the first people I called is Rex Morningstar. I'm like, this dude, not only can this guy sing, but then they knew you from Cetus. Now, so their whole context of who you are as a person was a hard rock singer anyway. Not this heartfelt, curious sort of Robert Smith person that I fell in love with out of the gate, but moreover this kind of hard rock singer. So you joined Henry's Child, right? Practice for a little bit, and just absolutely no rest for the wicked. So we immediately cut a record. We immediately go on tour, and So maybe a good place to start this whole conversation would be any thoughts you have about Henry's Child, about joining near the beginning, and then the writing process and what it was like to create the epic record that we did called Learning Too Much.
Yeah. So I enjoyed Henry's Child music, but the idea of joining the band was really kind of a crazy thing, because I remember there were a lot of band politics at the time, and, we would kind of pit ourselves against each other, because it was a very competitive music landscape at the time. And so I remember, trash talking Henry's Child and other bands, which I learned from quite quickly that that's probably not the best thing to do in a town the size of Eugene. I had run you guys down musically, and then, you contacted me about filling the singer spot, and I was really torn, because half of me really wanted to step up to that level of performance that you guys had reached. You're all extremely weathered and accomplished musicians. Doug had some sponsorships by Pearl, if I'm not mistaken. Rich was a legend, and you joining really, really made me want to belong to this thing. But at the same time, I had all this, this baggage from running you guys down. And so I remember having a big conversation with Charisse at the time, my wife now, and I said, I'm just gonna do it, and we'll see what happens. So I ended up joining, and it was good. It was a really amazing, fun experience. The one thing about Henry's Child that I don't know a lot of other people know is that you guys had the greatest work ethic of any other band that I've been a part of or have seen, because you guys were serious about it. I thought I was serious in my other bands. Cetus, we would practice 3 nights a week for about 3 hours a pop, but you guys you guys lived it and breathed it. It was just an awesome thing, and that's I have to imagine that your work ethic is attributed to your degree of success that you've had and the name recognition. It's just awesome to see you guys taking that even further now that you've kind of come back together with Andy. And to see you guys having like a second wind is just really, really cool in my eyes.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rex. Yeah, there's definitely no shortage of actual work and labor and love and passion that sort of goes into it. But let's talk about the record. I mean, the record was never released. Yeah, it's a record that really was very, very much ahead of its time politically. And musically, we took a lot of chances, we took a lot of risks, and we used a lot of different things. Can you talk about those different things that we used? What did we use? Different instruments, different samples, things like that.
Yeah, we used, we did our recording out at Dogwood Studios, and I really have a really awesome memories of recording out there. We used, like, if I'm not mistaken, a literal tape delay on a couple of the songs, where we used a machine. That's the old school way of delaying things. We used piano, we really had a variety of interesting styles and musical instruments, and mostly the styles, like, you guys really felt free to kind of go in a new direction, and so we kind of made this Frankenstein monster of, like, where I was at and where you guys were at, and then a bunch of ideas that you guys have always wanted to do that never had a chance. So we ended up with a really fantastic musical amalgam of different styles, okay? Some of the songs, you go through halfway, it's like a little bit of almost like rap, before rap and, metal were kind of fused together, and it was, you go halfway through a song and it would turn on a dime and end up being something else, a different rhythm, a different style. We had a lot of little mini songs that were 60 seconds in length, maybe 2 minutes in length, that were, I remember Rich doing one, I did a couple. They were like little gems peppered throughout this whole record. Man, I tell you, it's one of the most phenomenal projects that I've ever worked on. And the idea, as far as artistic achievement in my life, it was just a fantastic collaboration. And the fact that it hasn't seen the light of day makes it even more special. It's like an unreleased Beatles album, if I can be so bold, that never saw the light of day. And even though I'm not your singer, I was a part of it for a while, and I think that, for me, it's a source of pride, but it adds an extra dimension into the whole Henry's Child story, which I just think is fantastic.
Oh, it really does. It really does. And it pushed us to the bounds where we were not creating something for a record company. We were kind of doing something that was our own thing. And in a way, it felt almost kind of like our Sgt. Pepper's, because we would use samples and we would use loops and things that we typically wouldn't actually use. And so there's one song that stands out in particular that I've been just dying to play on this podcast, and it's called Digger. Digger is kind of the best, in my opinion, it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's got kind of the chunky, heavier, kind of the 90s alt metal that you would sort of expect from Henry's Child, and an outro that's a little more singy and a little more flying and ethereal in that way. You want to talk about the lyrical content of Digger? What did Digger mean to you?
Yeah, so Digger was based, being very politically active at the time. I was an ultra left-wing political activist at the time. Digger's all about this, the extreme fringes of society, the artists, the philosophers, and even Christ figures or cult leaders who are on the extreme edge, and they kind of weather the waves of time and movement, and some perish. So the song is designed around the idea of a canary in a mine that is more sensitive to the gas. Canary die, they knew to get out of the mine. And so that's the whole idea behind the song, was this digger and this canary. So that's kind of this backstory.
Nice. Yeah. And this was probably, we'd never really solidified an order in this, but because I've had this on my iPod for almost 20 years, this is about in the midway point of the record. So we're going to go ahead and play it now. This is Digger from the album Learning Too Much from Henry's Child.
Gotta love, gotta hate. In my death, I've kissed the burning sun.
I've kissed the burning sun. About the light in the black. The canary died to give the digger's life. I've kissed the burning sun. The canary died to give the digger's life. Gotta love, got to hate in my death. I've kissed the burning sun. Boy. Got to love, got to hate in my death. I've kissed the burning sun. About the light in the black. The canary died
Years after this recording was finished, we had talked briefly about the record, and one of the things that you called it was a political rock opera. How were your politics played into the record with this? I remember like you and Farmer going and protesting the WTO and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about your politics back then, Rex.
You know, the whole point of me being a musician and a lead singer specifically, because I could have done anything, was that I was always created to be a loudspeaker for a movement. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm a preacher. And so I'm a loudspeaker for a movement. But back then, I was kind of searching for my voice and what I wanted to represent. And of course, leftist politics at the time really considered the poor and the undertrodden in a way that I didn't see represented in any other type of political movement at the time. And so I went far left against my upbringing and against what I was raised with. I went far, far left. And I ended up being at the WTO protests, as you mentioned, and took a lot of photos there and was part of an intense movement to try to like equalize the wage gaps and all those things. And I felt like the greatest use of my time was to be a mass a speaker for the masses. And as I progressed in that, I started to realize that, like, first of all, the message that I was preaching, for me, really ultimately ended up being a message of dysfunction. And that wasn't because of Henry's Child, and it wasn't because of what you guys did. It was really the content of my lyrics and the direction of the songs. And maybe given enough time, that would have equaled out. But for me, it was just like I had issues kind of projecting those things out after a while, because my views had started to change. The other thing is that I went from this idea of political movement being the greatest source of change to one of more interrelationship issues. So dealing with people one-on-one or small groups, I actually think that has much more power in the long run than speaking a message to a massive group of people, because the masses don't know who I am. And typically, they don't pay much attention to song lyrics. And so for me, the one-on-one with people really started to take paramount in my mind and in my life. And so that was at the time when I really just figured out that being in a band and touring and being in smoky bars and the whole lifestyle really didn't appeal to me as a human being, because I'm more of a homebody and I'm more of an intellectual thinker rather than someone who hits it every night. It wasn't ultimately a good fit for me, and I really think that me leaving the band when I did was actually better for you guys than if we had 3 or 4 years of some success and then me pulling out at the last minute. So it was kind of a one-off, but the one-off is special, in a unique, special way. But that was kind of ultimately why the ultimate reason I left the band is that I just ended up realizing, as did Cat Stevens, Yosef Islam, that I had a different calling in life. And nothing against my background or what I had done with you guys, but it really just, that experience of being on a Northwest tour with you guys really solidified that in my mind. And I said, it's wonderful, but it's not for me.
Well, that one-on-one impact, that still stands. I mean, Rex and Charisse, I met my daughter's mother through them. My life was forever changed. I have a kid that's in high school now. That is,
yes.
As a result of knowing Rex and having Rex and Charisse be a very meaningful, very big part of my life. And even later on, 6 years after that, he ended up being the pastor that married me and my wife. So Rex and Charisse have had a huge, huge impact in my life. And so why don't we maybe wrap this up while you tell me about your church? What sort of ministry are you in these days?
Going back to the idea of helping people out, and my whole calling in life, I really saw that, being a mouthpiece is important, but more than anything is being a good leader of people. And most of the influential leaders that I saw were not just leaders, but they were doers too. Rather than an authoritative kind of leader or someone who lords their authority over people. And so I ended up just doing a lot of manual labor, a lot of scrubbing toilets for the ministry, a lot of cleaning bathrooms, a lot of walking people to the home at night, buying them groceries, giving them the literal shoes and the shirt off my back at times. We served a very poverty-stricken group of people down in Medford that just really needed a lot of social services and things. So we ended up having a pantry and a clothing ministry, and that type of work I found out was extremely rewarding. And so I just ended up dedicating my whole life to helping the underprivileged and those who are drug addicted, single mothers, children without a mother or father in the scene, older people who have no support system. All of those things we encompass, and that's really my life's work. But so proud to have some time with my good friends in Henry's Child, and I wish them all the success in the world. And you guys definitely have earned it, and the success that you are having now, I'm just thankful for, because it is really a blossoming of, perhaps in this time and in this place, a blossoming and an exhibition of something beautiful created by all of these different individuals, but it takes it to a whole different, higher level. So if you get a chance, check out the unreleased, at least a few of the songs, the unreleased Henry's Child album, because I just believe it's just a special, special moment in time.
Yeah, so do I. So do I, my friend. Hey, Rex, thanks for sitting down and talking to me about music today. I genuinely appreciate it, my friend.
Anytime, Tom, and God bless you. Good luck.
Thank you, brother.
On the ground.